Thank you, everyone, for attending. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're sitting and listening. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about Endgames. As we discussed a little earlier, I focused on a book in 2005 around managing the Endgames. I want to take a little time to talk about just defining what an Endgame is from my point of view. Software Endgames. So if you talk about software projects in general, there's these opening moves kind of phase. To me, the focus in opening moves is around requirements, design, architecture, things like that, maybe getting a charter, signing up the business. That's that early phase in the project. Kind of the middle game is around execution from my point of view. So mostly coding. It's mostly the realm of the development organization, the business analysis organization. You're refining requirements. And you're you're sort of getting the structure of things down. And then the end game for me is this transitional phase where you're taking, you're moving from definition to construction to testing and deployment. And I think independent of your methodology, if you're in an agile method, then your end games, that sequencing looks different, and it's time boxed and things like that. And if you're in traditional waterfall, it looks more like the context that I was experienced with when I was writing the book. But I think any methodology has kind of that phasing, and I would argue that any methodology has an end game. And what you're trying to do then in the end game, to me, it's sort of the realm of the testing team. That doesn't mean they're sort of taking the lead in getting something out the door. They're really refining metrics. So I focus on the test team, although they're not central to it. Clearly, developers and project managers are part of that, and other functional domains are part of that in really delivering a product. And there's operations folks and things. But I think the guide, what I like to emphasize, and I think it's a core emphasis for this talk, is emphasizing the role of QA or software testing as guides. And that to me, I've leveraged that very well in the past in software projects to really having successful projects. And it's all about delivery to business value. So getting something that you feel proud of, that hits the customer mark, that has business value, getting it out the door and being able to deliver it, I think is somewhat critical. So the outline for this talk today is I want to talk about the notion of QA teams and testers, individual testers, and the teams themselves as guides, not reporters, within that endgame context. I want to introduce the idea, if you haven't heard it before, of metrics analysis questions, or what I'll refer to as Maqs, and how do you leverage those in looking at data. I'm going to introduce or expose you to 5 key metrics. This is not an exhaustive set, so I'm not intending to say these are the only 5, and you must listen to all 5 of these metrics or you're going to fail or anything like that. But I want to give you a sense for what I pay attention to from the point of view of defects when I'm trying to deliver software, if I'm guiding an end game. And much of my context has been as a manager or a leader or a director or a project manager, and trying to guide things out the door, and I've had reasonable success with that. We'll explore Maqs for each one of the data points, for each one of the key metrics, and talk about guide points or guidance and figuring out how well we're doing. Are we on track or are we off track? And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So as an extension to that introduction, I want to adjust, and I mean no disrespect to any to testers, and that's really the audience here, or anyone who's really participating in the end game. But I want to speak, I want to look in the eye of the testers, and I want to turn us. In my experience, a lot of testers are focused on detecting and reporting, or maybe serving as a gating role from the end game. And maybe they're a safety net. So testing is a safety net, or testing is a gating operation, meaning giving the business, we're either ready or we're not. We're setting up a gate position with some data, and that's not bad. I'm not saying that that's bad, but to me, that's maybe what what we get paid for is doing effective testing. But there's something a little more than that I'd like to influence the testers in the audience to do, and that's to step up a little bit and stretch and look underneath the covers, look at the data, and actually become, you're not simply a tester, but really shining the light on how well are we doing, are we ready, what areas of the application are doing well, what areas are not. Have the courage to shine the light there and actually say something about it to people who can affect a change in the organization, in the project as soon as possible. So I want to shift from detecting, reporting, safety net, gating, that thinking, and that's not bad, and I mean that, to one, including all of that, but serving as a project guide, providing, deep insights, and then, really importantly, making recommendations about what to do, identifying bottlenecks and efficiency improvement from a project perspective, risk detection, talking about resources. We have too many testers. I know that's not possible, and too few developers, and we need to add developers to the project, or vice versa. And really talking about guiding the project from a capability perspective or from a workflow perspective. Continuing that line, a notion that I found very useful is that of a metrics analysis questions, or Maqs. I'll refer to them as MAQs, or Maqs going forward. I first stumbled upon the idea in an STQE article. This is a predecessor to a magazine called Better Software, if you've ever heard of that. And in 2001, Anna Allison wrote an article called Meaningful Metrics. And unfortunately, Allison, if you go back at Anna in the history, she was killed in 9/11. She was on the Boston flight as part of her consulting duties. And so I think this is a republish of that article posthumously, and kind of nodding to some of the value she added to our profession. And this is something she left behind, and I think is quite valuable. So Maqs help you to look for the meaning behind the metrics of the project data. It's a list of questions, it's reminders, it's things, I think in terms of them being on 3x5 cards sometimes, and there's questions for us to ask as we're looking for defect or trend data in a project. They remind us to ask. They pique our curiosity. Again, we're, testing teams and project Endgames are very pressured. So a lot of, and we, have dates, and we're driving, and we're working overtime. So oftentimes we need reminders or probes or prods or something to just tickle our our interest to remind us to look, to take some extra time because it's worth it. And that's what I'm trying to set the stage for Maqs. You're always looking to provide that higher level guidance to the project team. So let me kind of dive into what a MAC is. Some examples might help. So metrics analysis question one. Has there been a change in QA personnel assignments that could account for fewer bugs being found in the last cycle? So the observation here is we found fewer bugs in the last cycle. Now, there could be multiple drivers for that. We could have had test team vacations, test team time off. They could have gone for a training junket in the Endgame. I know that's not possible, but there could be that part of the dynamic, or the project could be just starting up, or another project could be starting up and leaching resources from the team. Or, hey, there's some good news here. We could be actually producing higher quality software. So the MAC question drives us underneath the data, underneath the observation to say, is it good news or bad news? What is it? What are the core or root fundamental drivers for what we're observing? And they remind us to ask that question and not to simply react to what we're seeing in the data. Second MAC, give you a flavor for it. We've seen a drastic increase in priority 1 defects since the last release. And I think in terms of Endgame QA cycles as being kind of iterative or cyclical. So very often we get a test release, we test it, we observe, and we might contrast it against the previous iteration and the previous iteration. And we're looking at trending from code drop to code drop to code drop, or whatever you want to refer to it as. You're trying to narrow the maturation of software. So again, we've noticed this priority 1. Is it good news? Did the developers do something? Did they do something positive or not? Did they add a new component and fix some related defects? Are we testing something for the first time? So what's the increase? Is it expected? So did we expect it to increase? And that's normal behavior. So don't worry about it. There's no alarms. Turn off the fire alarm. Or is it actually unexpected? Is it in a component area that we had actually settled down 3 cycles ago? And in that case, we may have a problem. But the MAC drives us underneath. The analysis question drives our thinking to ask some of those questions and to look a little deeper. The third example